everyone. My name is Evie Lupine and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about bondage DIY ideas. I consider myself to be something of a bondage enthusiast, if you will. It has long been one of my favorite kinks, and I think it works really well alongside tons of different roleplay concepts and relationship styles. Unfortunately, though, I see a lot of folks giving bondage a skip entirely because they assume it's not going to be their thing or it seems way too complicated to even try. And I don't blame folks who think this. If you have been in the scene for a while, depending on where you live, of course, you have no doubt seen the elaborate harnesses and complex rope suspensions which always draw attention at a local dungeon. And don't get me wrong, I love doing scenes like those, and they're a lot of fun, especially when you eventually work up to be able to do them. But you can see those and easily walk away, thinking that is the be-all, end-all of bondage, and it can seem woefully out of reach. The skill, the time it takes to learn how to do, the time it takes to set up a scene like that. And wait, the rope is how much again? Yeah, that's a real number for how much a good quality rope kit will cost you. So of course, people are going to see that, and a lot of them are going to stick with their usual comfortable routine because that sticker shock of cost and skill level required is simply too much. And to be fair, the bondage community doesn't really do a whole lot to absolve this impression either. They're kind of proud of it, to be honest with you. They tend to be more insular, they have their own kinks, they show up, they do bondage, and then they go home. They have their own spaces, their own classes, their own conventions, educators, books, the works, and they are happy to be more separate from the rest of the community. And it's kind of a misnomer to even really call it the bondage community because what it's really ended up being is just the shibari community, which is one very particular way of doing bondage. And if you want to learn how to do that, be prepared to spend 2 hours with your arms like this learning how to do one thing for an entire class. That is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and it's certainly not my cup of tea. I hate going to a convention and spending the whole day just like T-posing for someone, waiting for anything interesting to happen. But, that is my own personal baggage. What I want to do today is I want to show you all how you can get started with bondage right now without having to shell out for a specialty robe or having to pay $300 for an intensive just to learn the very basics. So to understand what makes a good tool for bondage, be it a custom sleep sack or something you picked up for $5 at Target, I think it's worth discussing the motivations behind bondage briefly. The first thing I usually hear when a bottom says they enjoy bondage is that they find bondage to be relaxing. This is especially true for the neurospicy in the kink community. Think of being swaddled up in a weighted blanket or embraced in a tight hug from somebody you care about. It's like that. This can be one of the things about bondage too that can quickly trigger rope space, which is the bondage version of subspace, at least for some folks. Another potential trigger and motivation more broadly is the sensation of losing control that comes with being bound. Whether it's becoming a full-body mummy or simply having your ankles lashed together, this tends to create an instinctual feeling of, oh crap, yay, I'm at this person's mercy. This is so exciting. And more intense, tight forms of bondage can also lead to an adrenaline rush, comparable to what one might feel during an impact play scene, for example. For the top, who is the one doing the bondage, the motivations correlate here pretty nicely. They might enjoy being able to embrace their partner intimately. They might enjoy watching their partner suffer in their ropes, for example. Though I would say with tops, the most common motivation is the pleasure they get from being able to control and manipulate their partner's body. This is why it's really important to make sure you trust your top before you do bondage with them, because that motivation can go sideways pretty quickly. So that's a topic I will cover more at the end of the video. For now, this is just a basic overview of some of the motivations. There are others I'm not mentioning here, but I don't really want to spend too long getting into the weeds about all of this. So without further ado, let's talk about some simple and DIY bondage ideas. Number one for me is going to be saran wrap or cling film. I don't know what they call it in other countries. Like if you're from Australia or Germany or England, like what do they call cling film? Does it have a brand name? Anyways, idle thought aside, I have to start with this one because this is an all-time favorite for me. You can really dress it up or down, I guess pun intended, so to speak. With just a few dollars worth of material, you can do everything from a simple wrist and ankle restraint all the way over to full body bondage as you gain more experience. No knots or patterns required here. Plus, it offers the unique advantage of being clear, so you are more able to lean into that idea of maybe being exposed at the same time. Though the more you wrap, the more opaque the wrap is going to end up being. Nudity also works best for this material too. You can experiment with how much you overlap each layer and see what feels best for you and your partner. 3 to 4 layers is a good rule of thumb to start with. The key to keep in mind here is that the layers do need to be overlapping to a certain extent to work. Do, however, try to keep the wraps flat instead of bunching and twisting up like rope, because that can very quickly become uncomfortable and dangerous. Pro tip: if you want to allow for more movement or you want access to a certain body part for later, you can put a cotton ball or a wad of paper towel over that spot. Then when you wrap it, you can easily cut through to that without having to risk getting onto the skin by mistake, and then you can remove that ball of material, and then that body part is now exposed for your pleasure. This is a great combo if you want to do maybe, for example, a bondage and impact play scene. Number 2 is vet wrap. I am really surprised this one doesn't get more love. It's very customizable. You can pick it up from any feed or tack store. You can also buy it online for pretty cheap in bulk. And my advice with this is because it's quite narrow, buy more than you think you need because a single roll goes very quickly. It comes in a rainbow of colors and you can basically use it very similarly to how you might use cling film. I personally recommend using vet wrap for things like calf and arm binders, where your arms or legs are together like this. This is where the style of wide wrapping bondage really shines when compared to rope. If you want to do something like this with rope bondage, it can be pinchy and fiddly, and trust me, you can pull hair. It's not a fun time, honestly. Not my favorite way of doing that. So this can actually be an advantage if you want to do that particular style of bondage or you enjoy that kind of restraint. Mermaid roleplay, anyone? Certainly a possibility. Now, number 3, we have tea towels and bandanas and similar, basically, items of cloth. I could not do a DIY bondage list without talking about this classic American favorite, because that is exactly what a bandana is. If you look at some of the older imagery we have in the community of like what kink looked like, what the fantasies were like, bandanas were very commonly used for blindfolds and for gags. Also, if you have a larger one, they can be easily used for things like a wrist restraint or for ankle restraints. Now, I'm not going to do a tutorial here because I don't really have the time or the space, and YouTube doesn't really like tutorials with kink anymore. So I will just say if you want to learn how to do this, there are resources online you can go to. Also really like using something called a Japanese hand towel. I believe it's pronounced tenagui. I might be wrong about that. And those are really great because they're very long, but they're also narrow, which makes them very well suited for bondage, especially compared to like a big square bandana or like a square hand towel or something. But if you do want to use something like a bandana, you have a really nice long big one, you can also knot it up in the middle to take up space, and it also creates a little bit more of a ball gag feeling in the mouth, like something you can really kind of more bite into. Bandanas are great as well for bondage and for gags because they're very thin. So if you have maybe jaw issues like I do, they are much more comfortable in the mouth for most people. Keep in mind though, because it's fabric, it absorbs all of the spit, which can very quickly create a feeling of dry mouth and be uncomfortable. So that's a factor to consider as well. But I think that is a very quick, easy way to get into some DIY bondage. For number 4, we have something very similar, which would be robe ties and neckties. And I'm very sorry because I realize this is like a 50 Shades level DIY thing, but it does actually work, okay? It might be cliche, it might be played out, but it's a favorite for a reason. There's the role play aspect of it. There's the sensory feel of different necktie materials, the texture they might have, and the long length and narrow width lends itself really well to bondage. If you like something more soft and cushy, rope ties have similar principles as long as the material isn't super stretchy. I wouldn't recommend like a cotton one for this. Make sure you test out how stretchy it is before you use it. And what I really like robe ties and neckties for is not even directly using them on the body to tie the body together, but instead to restrain the body to something else. Like, for example, using it around the waist to tie somebody to a chair, or using a pair of neckties to lash someone's ankles to a bed. If you are looking for a tutorial, Morgan Thorne has a quick, simple videos with some ideas for how to use a necktie for bondage. Number 5 is belts, because you know what? Sometimes we don't want to be fussed with all that. We don't want to have to deal with knots or like tying anything to anything else. We just want it to be quick, simple, easy to use. And if you want that, there is nothing better than a good belt. And if you're really crafty, you can cut them into smaller lengths and you can do other things to repurpose them, but even unaltered belts have their place. So for example, you can use multiple belts to create a skirtless hobble skirt look, and you can also use it around the thighs or bind the arms together around the torso, depending on the size of the body you're restraining and the size of belts you have. Longer belts can also be used to restrain someone to a seat around their thighs or around their waist or chest, depending again on the anatomy of the person you are restraining, as well as the chair, right? If it has a really low back, you're not really going to be able to do as much as like a narrow, tall-backed chair. So belts were really great. I love the look of like a really layered belt bondage look. Very classic, very simple, very, very easy. Now for 6, if you are looking for something more intense and you have no fears about walking into a hardware store to get your kink toys, I have a great idea for you. Metal chain. They can be cut to size for any purpose. You can use it for bed restraints or a collar or a waist belt, for example. You can finish them with a lock if you want to emphasize that feeling of being controlled and losing your ability to escape. You can also use things like quick links or carabiners to make for easier removal. For longer wear, I recommend something like a nylon snap extender, so you have something you can quickly cut through in an emergency that's not metal, because who wants to have to call the fire department, right? Lots of safety options if you want to go for metal. Now, for number 7, I've been talking a lot about restraining the body, but bondage is so much more than just like tying up somebody's arms and legs, right? Let's say, for example, that you're into ABDL or you're a pet player and you really like the idea of safety mittens or paw mitts. Those can get pretty pricey, right? Well, one alternative to those is rubber dog mittens. I'm not gonna lie, these are not the most comfortable, but comfort isn't always the point, right? I recommend these for roleplay scenes and humiliation scenes too. Imagine being told to fold laundry while you've basically got what amounts to fancy balloons on both of your hands. It's funny, it's entertaining, it's silly, and it's quick, cheap, and simple, and won't really raise any eyebrows unless you don't have a dog at home, I suppose. For number 8, we have another less than traditional suggestion, and that would be a weighted blanket. This is something that Mistress Couple talks about in her book, The Ultimate Guide to Bondage, which I love. If you want the 411 on swaddling someone, she's got you covered. If you want to know what it's like to be completely ensconced in a kinky blanket burrito, this is a way to do that at a fraction of the price of what a sleep sack would cost you. It's like aftercare and a scene all in one. Pair belts with a good weighted blanket, and you've got a great scene put together. And for number 9, I do have a few more classic options up my sleeve for those who want to go in that direction. Nice, shiny duct tape is a common feature in many, let's say, BDSM pinup scenarios. Unfortunately, it doesn't really make for great bondage IRL around the body. It tends to rip out hair, the adhesive is way too strong, and it can be very irritating for some people. But luckily, we have many other kinds of tape we can use, like electrical tape, which is not as sticky and is easier to remove, while also having a very party-friendly, sleek black look. We also have microfoam tape, which is comfortable, latex-free, and designed to be used on the human skin. Plus, not to mention, the medical play potential, hello, great overlap there. And if you want color, gaffer or possibly gaffa tape is a popular option as well, which is less sticky than duct tape and thus less likely to result in non-consensual hair removal scenes. Be aware though that not everyone is going to react well to all adhesives, especially those that are not meant for human skin contact. Spot testing with a small strip is a great idea before committing to a full-on scene with it. And finally, for number 10, I have an idea from my very earliest days of experimenting with bondage, and that would be a stretchy book cover. You know the ones you had to get for school that were like, you could stretch them out like this and they came in like a bajillion colors? These can be found for like maybe $1 or $2, and they make for a great breathable face covering, blindfold, or hood. I really, really like this. It's still fun to use these, even like having many years more experience than I did at the beginning of my kink journey. And it's way more fun to have something that, you got yourself that's maybe rainbow or tie-dyed compared to the, cheap black stuff you would get from, Lovers or something. But before you scramble off to start doing bondage on your own, warning, okay, please listen to a few things I have to say first. Okay, 1, always have safety shears on hand, multiple if you can, on you, in your toy bag, in your line of sight. Just put them everywhere, okay? Not stuffed into a drawer, somewhere, who knows where. Know where it is at before you start the scene. Practice using a pair as well. Make sure you know how it feels. And if you are using a new material, practice cutting through it so you can see if you can actually cut through it easily. I also recommend having something like a marlin spike on hand that you can use to undo knots if you need to. And if you are going to be doing head-to-toe bondage, dehydration is very common, so make sure to keep water on hand. Also, set up your play area for bondage, move all of the hard-edged furniture out of the way, play on the carpet, load up on blankets and pillows, just have it be soft and cushy. You want to have a soft landing pad if something bad happens. And if you decide that you do want to do bondage more regularly, I recommend investing in some mats as well. Be particularly careful about how you position someone to do bondage. Trips and falls are a big risk factor. Doing bondage while sitting or kneeling is usually advisable. Bondage is best suited for the large columns of the body. That would be the torso, the chest, the wrist, the ankles, things like that. Avoid placing bondage directly over the joints or the neck. Hog tying someone also carries a non-zero risk of what is called positional asphyxia, since for some people this can hinder one's ability to breathe fully, especially over long periods. Any kind of bondage, hog tie or not, if you're going to be on your weight, on the floor, compressing your chest, be aware of this. Never leave someone in bondage unattended. If you are playing in private, make sure you trust the person completely who you are playing with and have some way to call for help or to contact a emergency contact if you need to. I also want to offer a word of caution about a few materials you'll commonly see on DIY lists like bungee cords and cotton rope. These materials tend to be very stretchy, which is not a great quality to have in rope bondage. That stretch can make knots cinch together way tighter than you intend, which can be uncomfortable at best and a danger at worst. I recommend avoiding such materials, especially when there are better options. Cotton can be okay, but you need to learn how to work with it first. You often see people panic about tight bondage being dangerous. The kind of posts you see on social media where it's like, oh my god, her limbs are purple, she's dying, she's in danger. It doesn't have to be dangerous. Someone's limbs changing color or not is not a reliable indicator of safety, and temporary short-term compression isn't high risk for most people, unless, of course, you have some kind of other health factor going on here. Nerve damage is an entirely separate issue that is worth exploring on its own in detail if you don't already know about that. So if you don't know what nerve damage is with bondage, go ahead and look that up because there's a lot of reading you're going to need to do first. And I'm saying all of this, and holy guacamole, there are a lot of factors to think about with bondage, isn't there? Yeah, bondage. It can be accessible, but it is not without risk. I think sometimes in the community, we tend to believe initially that impact play is super dangerous because, oh my god, you're hitting somebody. But bondage is sneakily very dangerous. So while these DIY ideas are fun and enjoyable and relatively simple, I do recommend that if you want to do anything I mentioned here today, you do some further research on how to use them safely. Other things you're going to want to consider with maybe how to remove them, how to tell if somebody's panicking, things along those lines as well, because there's always just so much more to learn out there. But I would love to know what you think about this one in a comment down below. Do you have any bondage DIY favorites I didn't include in this video? I tried not to mention anything that was just different types of rope because I feel like that's kind of cheating, and also the point is to show you all how you can do bondage without it being rope. But let me know what your thoughts are in a comment down below. Any other DIY options that you really enjoy, I would love to hear what you have to say. And if you did enjoy this already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.